I had gotten used to the quiet. After my divorce, the apartment felt like a cocoon safe still, and sometimes, if I let myself admit it, a little too quiet. I'd lived in the same building in Millstone for almost 10 years on the top floor, with a view that just barely cleared the maple trees. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Peaceful, reliable, predictable. So when I heard the first few notes of piano music drifting through my floorboards one Tuesday afternoon in March, I nearly dropped the spoon I was stirring my tea with. At first, I thought it was a radio. The sound was too precise to be random, a gentle, deliberate melody, almost hesitant in its beginning, like someone testing the keys after a long time away. I stood still in my kitchen listening, and then it stopped. Later that evening, I passed my landlord on the stairwell. Someone moved into 2B, I asked casually. He nodded. Yeah, young guy. Music teacher. Teaches private lessons downtown. Moved in 2 days ago. That explained the piano. I didn't think much of it after that. Just another tenant in the building. But the next afternoon, the music returned soft at first, then growing bolder, richer. I found myself drawn to it like a memory you can't quite place. I sat at my kitchen table with a book I barely read, listening to the rise and fall of his playing. It became a rhythm over the next week. Around 4 in the afternoon, the notes would begin. Sometimes gentle and classical Chopin, maybe. Other times, playful jazzy. A few times, something I couldn't recognize but felt like it belonged in a smoky lounge somewhere far away from Millstone. I never saw him, only heard him, until the day the elevator got stuck. I was balancing 2 bags of groceries when the doors jerked open, revealing a man already inside. He stepped back quickly, offering a small smile. Sorry, he said. It's a little temperamental. He reached to hold the door for me, and I stepped in. He was younger than me, maybe late 20s. Tall, with dark, slightly tousled hair and sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He smelled faintly of citrus and something woodsy, and there was something familiar about him, though I couldn't place it right away. I'm Oliver, he said. Moved into 2B last week. Ah, the piano. Claire, I said. 4A. I've been hearing your music. He looked sheepish. Too loud. No, I said, perhaps too quickly. It's lovely. His smile deepened. Thank you. I try to keep it between lessons. The elevator shuddered slightly as we rose, and I tightened my grip on the grocery bag. He noticed. It sticks sometimes, he said. You get used to it. I've lived here 10 years, I replied. Still haven't. He chuckled, and we stepped out into the hallway. Nice meeting you, he said, holding the elevator for a moment longer. You too, I said and meant it. That evening, I noticed the music didn't start at 4, or 5, or even by sunset. I told myself it didn't matter that I wasn't waiting for it, but the silence felt different now, like a missing page in a story I hadn't realized I'd been reading. Just after 8, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Oliver stood there with a wrapped plate in his hands. I baked too many scones, he said. Thought I'd share. I blinked. You bake terribly, but they're edible. I smiled and stepped aside. Come in, I'll make tea. Oliver sat at the small round table near my window where I usually read in the afternoons. The plate of scones sat between us, slightly misshapen but warm, and the tea steamed gently in both our cups. Outside, the streetlights flickered on against the deepening blue of evening. They smell better than they look, he said, reaching for one and breaking it in half. They smell great, I replied. You're being too modest. He shrugged. My mom used to bake. I guess something stuck. We sipped our tea in the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. It was strange how natural it all felt, like we'd done this before. Like this wasn't the first time a young man had come into my kitchen offering music and scones. Though, of course, it was. I used to live in Charleston, he said, after a moment, his tone shifting slightly. Taught at a private studio? Had a handful of students. I liked it. Why leave? I asked gently. He hesitated, running his finger around the rim of his cup. It started feeling like I was playing the same note every day. Same students, same small talk, same bars, same friends who didn't really ask how you were, just expected you to smile. I needed quiet. Change. I nodded slowly. Millstone's good for that. He looked at me, then not with surprise, but with something like recognition. Yeah, it feels honest here. For a moment, I forgot the age between us, the apartment floors, the roles we were supposed to play. I was just a woman sitting across from someone who saw something in this place, in this life, that I thought only I noticed. "You've been here a while," he asked. "Since before the divorce," I said simply. Then I stayed. It was easier. He didn't ask about the divorce. He didn't push. Just nodded like that answer was enough. Respectful. Present. We talked a little more about music, about favorite cities, about how neither of us could keep a houseplant alive for more than 3 weeks. I don't remember laughing that much in a long time, not the kind of laugh that surprises you, that slips out before you remember to restrain it. "You ever play?" he asked suddenly. "Piano? God, no." "You have good hands for it," he said, nodding toward my fingers. I looked down, slightly embarrassed. "They're mostly used for flipping book pages and stirring too much sugar into my tea." He smiled. "Still, if you ever want a lesson—" I raised an eyebrow. From the man who brings lopsided scones as a calling card. "Hey now," he said with mock indignation. "That's part of the charm." We were both smiling when he stood to leave. He picked up the now empty plate, hesitated, then said, "Thanks for letting me in." "You brought baked goods?" I said, walking him to the door. "You're welcome anytime." He paused just for a second, his gaze steady. "Then I might take you up on that." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairwell. I stood at the door longer than I should have, one hand still resting on the knob, listening for the first note of piano that night. It came 5 minutes later, soft, slow, and unmistakably played just for me. The rain started mid-afternoon, not a thunderstorm, just that steady, tapping kind of rain that turns the world quiet and silver. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed with a message from Oliver. "Piano tuner just left. Want to come down and help me test it out?" I stared at the screen, a little surprised. It felt like an invitation, but not a big one. Not heavy, just warm. "Sure. Give me 5 minutes." I changed into a soft navy sweater, pulled my hair back loosely, and slipped on flats. It wasn't a date, just an afternoon. A neighbor helping a neighbor. His door was already ajar when I reached the bottom landing. "Come in," he called from inside. I stepped into his apartment and paused. It was cozy in the way artist spaces often are, mismatched furniture that somehow worked together, stacks of music sheets on the table, a small potted plant struggling on the windowsill. And in the corner near the old brick wall sat the piano. It was upright black, a little worn, but beautiful. The kind of instrument that felt like it had stories. He looked up from the bench. "Sit anywhere. It might sound odd at first, needs to settle after the tuning." I sat on a nearby chair and watched as he placed his fingers on the keys. The first few notes were tentative, exploratory. Then something shifted. His posture relaxed. The music came fuller, more fluid. It wasn't showy. It wasn't for performance. It was intimate, personal, as if the piano had been waiting for his hands. "Beautiful," I whispered without realizing. He smiled, didn't stop playing. "What do you hear?" "Something sad," I said honestly. "But not lonely. Like remembering something you didn't know you missed." He looked over at me and the music softened. That's exactly how I felt playing it. When he finished, he stood, walked toward the kitchenette, and poured us both a glass of lemon water. The sound of the rain pressed gently against the windows, filling the silences we didn't rush to fill. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked suddenly. "Being part of something?" The question landed harder than I expected. Sometimes, I said, but I think I miss the idea of it more than the reality. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. I stared into my glass. After my divorce, I got very good at being self-sufficient, at telling myself I didn't need connection or conversation that lasted past pleasantries. And most days, I believed it. And now I met his eyes. There was no pressure there, just space. Now I'm starting to wonder if I got too good at pretending. He didn't respond right away, just walked to the piano and played a few simple chords. Nothing fancy, just soft background sound. I think people who've known absence, he said, can feel presence more deeply. That's not weakness, that's capacity. I looked at him, this young man with careful words and gentle music, who listened like it mattered. And I felt something in me unclench. We sat there for a while longer, the notes fading between us, and for the first time in years, I shared stories I hadn't told in a long time. About my first heartbreak. About the time I nearly left Millstone and didn't. About how sometimes I felt like I was aging in place invisible. He didn't fix it. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He just stayed. And when I left, an hour later, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, gleaming like they'd been polished. Something inside me felt polished too, like someone had gently wiped away the dust I didn't know had settled. It was nearly 8 when I heard it, a slow, haunting melody drifting through the floorboards. Nothing like what Oliver usually played. It wasn't classical nor jazzy. It was something else. Raw, unfinished. Honest in a way that made me set down my book without even realizing I had. I stood in the hallway for a long moment listening. There was a pause in the music, then a shift, a new chord, then silence. And just like that, my body was moving before my mind had caught up. I slipped into sandals, grabbed my cardigan, and walked down the stairs to his door. I didn't text. I didn't knock immediately. I just stood there for a second, heart gently thudding, wondering if this was crossing a line I didn't fully understand yet. Then I raised my hand and knocked. The music stopped. A few seconds later, the door opened and Oliver stood there barefoot, a pencil tucked behind one ear, his shirt slightly rumpled. "Hey," he said, surprised but not unwelcome. "Everything okay?" "I heard the music," I said. I know that's not a reason to show up, but it felt different tonight. He stepped aside. "Come in." I entered, and the piano still carried warmth from his touch. Sheets of music were scattered across the floor in a small arc. He picked one up and glanced at it before looking back at me. "I've been trying to finish something I started years ago," he said. "But I always stop halfway." "Why?" He shrugged. I guess I never had the right reason to finish it. I sat down in the same chair I had the last time. The room smelled faintly of rosemary and something slightly smoky incense, maybe. "Play it for me," I said. He hesitated, then returned to the bench. He played, and it was what I'd expected, broken in parts, rich in others. Some places, halting, others flowing like breath. When he stopped, it was abrupt, like a conversation cut off mid-sentence. I waited a moment, then asked softly, "What were you thinking of when you started writing it?" He didn't look at me at first. Being alone in a room and not knowing if anyone even notices you're still there? The words landed deep. "I know that feeling," I said. He turned then, just slightly. "You do." I nodded. After the divorce, I'd sit on my own couch and wonder if the quiet around me was echo or just me bouncing off nothing. He looked at me like he was seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in before understanding. Recognition. Then he said, "But I don't feel that way when you're here." The room went still. I didn't know what to say, but something inside me loosened. Maybe I didn't have to say anything. I want to finish this piece, he continued, voice quieter now. But I think I want to finish it for you. I felt my breath catch, not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. And it had been so long since anyone had said something so gently daring. You're the first person who's listened to it without trying to fix it, he added. I smiled. Maybe it didn't need fixing. Maybe it just needed time. We didn't talk much after that. I stayed a little while longer, sitting quietly as he played fragments of melodies that blurred into one another. I watched his hands, how carefully they moved, how honest they were. When I finally stood to go, he walked me to the door but didn't reach for me, didn't press. He simply said, "I'm glad you came." And I was, more than I could explain. I found it the next morning tucked inside my mailbox with no envelope, just a small flash drive in a clear plastic case and a sticky note folded neatly around it. In Oliver's handwriting, it said, "This is what you sound like to me." I stood there on the front steps of our building, the early light still soft on the concrete, and stared at the note longer than I should have. My heart did that strange floating shift, the one that comes when you know something is about to change and you're not sure whether to run from it or let it pull you in. Inside, I slid the drive into my laptop and clicked play. The music began simply with a few light chords, hesitant at first, like waking up. Then came a gentle rise, a melody soft and curious, weaving in and out of silence. It didn't build to anything dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was quiet, delicate, like a story told in glances and half smiles. But then right around the middle, something shifted. The rhythm slowed, deepened. There was an ache there, not sadness exactly, but longing. Recognition. The sound of someone remembering what it meant to feel again. It was beautiful in a way that made my throat tighten. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I was in his apartment, sitting in that worn chair, watching his fingers move across the keys, like they were searching for something they already knew. When the music stopped, I sat in silence for a long time. Later that afternoon, I wrote a short note, folded it, and slid it under his door. "It sounds like you see me." And that scares me more than I expected. But it also makes me feel more alive than I've felt in years. Thank you. See. I didn't hear from him that evening. No knock, no music, just silence, the kind that doesn't feel cold but waiting. The next day, as I stepped out to water the little herb box on my balcony, I saw him coming in from the sidewalk, a bag of groceries in one hand, earbuds in. He looked up, saw me, and pulled one earbud free. "Morning," he called up. "Morning," I replied. He smiled just briefly, then turned to go inside. But before the door closed, he paused. "You doing anything for dinner?" I blinked. "Tonight?" He nodded. I considered lying, saying I had plans, telling myself it was too soon. But then I said no. "I'm not." "Good," he said. "I'll cook." Then he disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the balcony, the scent of rosemary and basil rising around me like quiet encouragement. I hadn't been asked to dinner in years. Not like this. Not by someone who saw me as more than polite conversation and routine. And I knew then something between us had passed the point of maybe. Oliver's door opened before I had a chance to knock. He stood there in a dark gray t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, holding a wooden spoon in one hand and looking just slightly flustered. "Hi," he said, smiling. "You're right on time. I may or may not have slightly burned the first batch of garlic bread." I laughed. "That's forgivable. As long as there's wine." "There's definitely wine." He stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was warm, filled with the scent of tomato, basil, and something slightly sweet. Soft jazz played in the background, not piano this time, but a mellow saxophone weaving quietly through the air like a second voice in the room. The table was already set, 2 plates, mismatched cloth napkins, a flickering candle that had clearly been lit just moments before. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, stirring something on the stove. "So I made everything I knew how to make, which is basically pasta and hope." I smiled. "That's all anyone really needs." We sat down a few minutes later, and the meal was surprisingly good. The pasta was a little overcooked, the sauce slightly too sweet, but it didn't matter. The wine was crisp, the laughter easy, and the space between us felt more familiar than new. He told me about the students he'd started teaching in town, a 6-year-old who refused to play with both hands, and a retired nurse who insisted Chopin should be played with sass. I told him about my failed attempt to learn French and how I once adopted a cat that turned out to belong to my neighbor across the hall. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and the last bite of bread, the conversation slowed. Not awkwardly, just gently. He looked at me then, a little more seriously. "Can I say something that might be too much?" I nodded slowly. "I don't really know what this is between us," he said. "But I know it doesn't feel casual." The words settled between us like a small weight, not heavy, but meaningful. "I know," I said. "It doesn't feel casual to me either." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling like he'd been holding that in. "I think about you more than I probably should. Not just in that passing way, but in that wondering way. Wondering what your day was like, what you're thinking when you're quiet, what you look like when you're laughing at something no one else hears." I didn't speak right away. My throat felt tight, but not from fear. It was the kind of tight that comes when something true has just entered the room. "I've spent a lot of years building distance," I said, "making my world neat, predictable, small." "I know," he said gently, "but I'm not here to tear that apart. I'm just hoping you might let me be part of it." I reached across the table slowly and placed my hand over his. He turned his palm upward and held mine. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not because of you, because of what this could mean." "I am too," he said, "but I think the fear means it matters." We sat there for a long time, our hands resting between wine glasses and breadcrumbs. The candle flickering lower, the music shifting into something slower. And when I left that night, not too late, not rushed, he walked me to my door upstairs and kissed my hand before I turned the key. Not rushed, not performative, just real. The morning after dinner, I woke earlier than usual. The sunlight filtered through my bedroom blinds in soft golden stripes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the day pressing on my chest. There was a lightness, a quiet hum beneath the surface, like the feeling just before a favorite song begins. I made coffee, stood at the window, listened for music, and sure enough, around 9, a single note rose from below, then another slower, warmer. A melody I hadn't heard before, but one I somehow recognized. I smiled, stepped out onto the balcony with my mug, and waited. He must have heard me because a moment later his window slid open. Oliver leaned out still in a t-shirt, hair slightly tousled, eyes bright. "Morning," he called up. "Morning," I replied, the steam from my mug curling between us like a secret. He didn't say anything else, and he didn't need to. I went back inside, and a few minutes later there was a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, he stood there holding nothing. No scones, no flowers, no piano music in his hands, just himself. "I was wondering if maybe today we could just take a walk," he said. I nodded. "I'd like that." We didn't talk much as we walked through the park near the river, past the people walking dogs and the elderly men playing chess under the pavilion. We just moved together in step, occasionally brushing shoulders, occasionally smiling without reason. When we reached the benches near the water's edge, he sat beside me, not too close, not too far. "I used to think love had to look a certain way," I said softly, watching the ripples across the lake. "Big moments, grand declarations, certainty." "And now?" he asked. I turned to him. "Now I think maybe it's quiet, patient, A series of small choices you make day after day. He nodded, like showing up, even when you're unsure. I reached for his hand then, this time without hesitation, without fear. We sat that way for a long while, not needing anything from the moment except what it already was enough. I didn't know what the future held. We hadn't labeled anything. We hadn't made promises we couldn't yet keep. But I knew this: I was no longer hiding in silence, no longer shrinking from the possibility of connection. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone grieving a past life, not as someone older or wiser or cautious, but simply as myself. And he, this kind, curious, unexpected man, was choosing to sit beside that version of me. Maybe the world wouldn't understand it. Maybe that didn't matter. Some things aren't meant to be explained, only felt, only followed, only lived. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Until then, keep your heart open. You never know who might move in downstairs.